So this panel will be on fairer politics, and this builds on the fact that in Michael's report, he discussed issues of political culture, lack of transparency, lack of plurality that led to the experience of the crisis that Britain had throughout COVID. So we're looking very much at the structural systemic issues, not just at the government itself at the moment. To do that, we are delighted to be joined first off by Sunder Katwala. Sunder is director of the think tank British Future, which works to advance the education of the public in subjects of equality and diversity, human rights, racial and cultural harmony, citizenship, and social inclusion. Over to you, Sunder. And as I say, you can take probably about 5 or 6 minutes if you need them.
Thanks very much, Matt. It's good to be here. I'm just coming from our event to launch our report on inclusive Englishness, so that's why I've got my football shirt on a couple of minutes earlier. But that's another bridging project that I think we need to do. What I want to talk to you today about is what we heard in the Talk Together exercise we conducted with the Together Coalition, which the Together Coalition is a coalition that everybody's invited to join about making this a kinder, closer, more connected society. And what we started with is this very big public engagement. We were going to do it before COVID. We ended up doing it during the pandemic, about what unites and what divides and what do we need to change. So it ended up being very much Zoom based, but we had 500 people in 70 Zoom meetings getting into this, and 160,000 people contributed. So we've got a broad range of very broad range of issues about what should change and in the way we debate and discuss in politics. COVID was a roller coaster in many ways. We started very united over lockdown at the end. We ended very united over vaccines at the end as well. But in between, it was very choppy in terms of political trust. You had the Dominic Cummings episode, you had real north-south issues going on around the different lockdowns. You saw declining the sense of connection. So a stronger society often in our relationships with each other, in our local relationships, but often more distance, more confusion about government. And that's playing into some long-standing debates about the way we debate politics, the 5 years debate we've been having about Brexit. That doesn't feel over to people in Scotland, for example. They're going into a heightened era of political polarisation. So this sense that by geography, by politics, by generation, by ethnic group, by social class, we might be falling apart into a them and us debate. COVID was almost a distraction from that for all of its tragedy. People see the sources of division in our society and our politics is quite clear. They think that politicians are often, the way we debate politics doesn't try to find common ground, it clashes. They see the media as very much interested in the combat and the conflict and the disagreement and the negatives, and not interested in the constructive. And they see social media as amplifying, accelerating these difficult decisions and setting us against each other. So, lots of us use social media, but there's a real conflict about the type of culture that it has, and a feeling that, people lean out of these debates that just get very heated and polarized. So there's a real appetite for change in the way we talk to each other, but it's easier to say that than to do it. What sorts of ideas would make a difference? People really think some quite simple things like listening to each other more and finding places where we do that would be good. And they're not sure the internet space we've got at the moment work, but doing that in person appeals to people quite a lot. Finding local places where you listen to people, you don't have to agree with somebody who's got a different view, but you actually meet them, and you're not now debating the caricature of the person who supports or opposes Black Lives Matter. You're also engaging with the real person who's got different views to you. I think more support for those kinds of local activities would be a difference. People definitely think that stronger agreement on the boundaries between free speech, which is important, and hate speech, which crosses the line, is really important. And they really think the social media companies need to do more to have those boundaries, because 80 or 90% of us could behave much better and very thoughtfully towards each other, but if absolute trolls are just coming on, then it's going to be hard to change the culture. So an appetite for doing something that's difficult, which is trying to shift the culture, but some real incentives, I think, for politics, the media, social media as well, to encourage not our best citizen-based selves. I just want to put 2 points of challenge to us in trying to act on this. And in this panel, I think there's a challenge for political actors in this space, and there's a challenge for civic society in this space. One thing I think we need to do in politics is it's easy to have a let's disagree well conversation where the answer is that when my opponents are wrong, they should stop being wrong and agree with me and understand that I'm right. And all sides of politics do this. So you look at the debate about culture wars. They start culture wars while we pursue social justice, or we're just sitting here conserving things and they start culture wars and we have to respond. Everyone thinks other people start culture wars and that they don't. And so this sort of them and us sense of who has to disagree better doesn't look in the mirror enough. So I think in politics, you've got to separate out a perfectly legitimate project of building a progressive alternative to the current government and having political reforms that project would do, from this foundational issue of political culture that I think has to get across political perspectives. You can't have that debate within one set of parties or one side of the spectrum. It's got to go across the spectrum. Everyone was very frustrated and angry about Brexit, but there were two different ideas about what was going wrong. The politicians weren't doing what the public had wanted or what the public had voted for, or the public had been told a set of lies and therefore it was not happening. So if you're just having two parallel arguments about why we disagree, you're not doing the bridging. So separate the politics. And then my challenge to civic society, to end on this point, civic society feels it wants to step up and bridge the divides in our society by education, by social class, by ethnicity, by geography. But civic society is not well distributed across those divides. If we don't deal with the integration challenge in civic society itself, so that we have a better reach across those ethnic divides, across those social class divides, across those geographic divides, we risk having a conversation at one end of the society about why we're so divided, instead of organising a conversation across our society, not just with people who agree with us about how to disagree better, but with people who disagree with us on some of the substance about how we can change the political culture and have better disagreements. Thanks.
Thank you, Sunder. Wonderful, and some really brilliant challenges there. I'm going to now pass to Jennifer Nadel. Jennifer is co-director, along with myself, of the think tank Compassion in Politics. Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Matt. And yes, when we founded Compassion in Politics, its goal was to promote compassion as a unifying value, so that it didn't matter what political tribe you come from, what party you come from. If you care about compassion, then you can join together and try and find collaborative solutions. And over the last 2 years, we have positively engaged with over 100 MPs from 7 different parties to try and do that. But very quickly it became apparent that we can't change the substance of politics unless we change the way we do politics. If we are conducting politics in shouting, jeering, blaming, finger pointing, point scoring, mocking, we're going to have a very triggered, conflict-based political arena, and that's exactly what we have right now. So for any genuine new politics to happen, we have to bring the psychological dimension into the room. And as Sunder was saying, when we have an us or them political situation, which is founded on conflict, which is founded on winners and losers, founded on tribalism, party comes first, country comes second, we have the system that we have right now, and we've normalized things which are just not normal. They're not normal in our households, they're not normal in our workplaces. We have normalized the way debate takes place on the floor of the House, and it is shocking and appalling and patriarchal and wouldn't be tolerated in any other environment. And yes, we're told it's an important tradition. That needs to change. We're told that politicians lie, just get over it. Everyone knows politicians lie. Well, first of all, not all politicians lie, but the epidemic of lying that we do have at the moment is seriously undermining our faith in democracy. So if we have a public that thinks that all politicians lie and that that's normal, we have a breakdown of trust. And there are really simple things that we can do. And I just want to talk about some of the positive things that we can do that are already happening on this issue. There is no sanction if a politician lies repeatedly, deliberately lies. I'm not talking about exaggerations or rhetorical flourishes. I'm talking about saying things that they know to be untrue or have subsequently been told are untrue, but they leave on the record. So we have some really positive things happening. We have we drafted a bill at Compassion in Politics to stop the lying, which would introduce political sanctions for politicians who deliberately lied and didn't then correct themselves when those lies were pointed out. And we're very hopeful that that will be taken forward initially as a 10-minute rule bill, but hopefully it will gain support, much more support, and be taken forward. We've got a public petition on that, so if you'd like to go on to change.org and sign it, we've got 200,000 people already signed up, and that is in tandem with other actions that we're supporting. Advertising at the moment, political advertising isn't bound by the same rules as all other advertising, so you can't lie when you're selling a car or a packet of, a bottle of washing up liquid, but you can lie when you're selling a political policy. So very simple fix. You ensure that political advertising comes into line with the same rules that all other advertisers have. Then we have the Hillsborough law that is being promoted at the moment, which would promote a duty of candour. Then we have the amazing Jackie Weaver, who is campaigning on the issue of the fact that there are no sanctions if a councillor is in gross misconduct, is shown to have behaved with gross misconduct. There are absolutely no ways of getting rid of a councillor who's a bully, who's a sexist, who's homophobic, who's racist. So we have Jackie Weaver championing that. So there are measures that we can take forward and that would make a difference. It isn't something we have to roll over and accept. And I just wanted to talk about psychological awareness, because without psychological awareness, we are going to continue to operate in this triggered fashion. Sunder was talking about the way that we talk, but if we really want to build bridges rather than walls, we have to learn some of the basic psychological techniques that are used in mediation. We have to make I statements. The moment we say, you shouldn't have done this, you are a whatever, we create a triggered situation and a situation of conflict. When we talk about what we stand for, what we believe in, when we talk about our beliefs, our principles, when we depersonalize conversations. We ran a campaign at the last general election called Stop the Nastiness, which I know Caroline and some of the members of Parliament who are speaking later signed up to. And that was just a very simple pledge not to make personal criticisms of other people, and yet personal criticisms are made all the time in the political arena, which is instantly going to create a triggered state. And the moment that we are psychologically triggered, we are no longer able to operate in the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, which moderates our behavior, which allows us to weigh up different solutions, which allows us nuance, and we're forced back into the amygdala, which is the dinosaur part of the brain, which wants us to fight, freeze, or run away. So we need to bring psychological awareness into politics, and we need to stop normalizing those things which aren't normal, which wouldn't be acceptable anywhere else, and yet somehow we have been convinced to tolerate. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. And lastly for this panel, but by no means least, we have Neal Lawson, who is Director of Compass. Neal.
Thanks, Matt. It might well be least, I think, because I've no idea what I'm going to say. I'm going to start by saying that I just think Compassion in Politics is a brilliant organisation. People who come into existence to change culture. We could all try and change policy or have a demand or whatever, but to change culture is the most important thing. And I think what you've been doing is fantastic and inspiring. And I'm really glad to be here and really glad to support your work. I just kind of want to let my heart pour out, really, and say that I'm in politics because I'm in politics because I believe in people, and I believe in everyone, whatever party they're from or no party, that all of us have got this kind of amazing, beautiful potential for our own lives and our families' lives and our neighborhoods and our societies and our worlds. And starting with that kind of fundamental belief in the best in everyone, I think is just absolutely essential, because it seems to me there are two ways that people do politics. There's a kind of politics of control, and I'm right, and I'm going to tell you what the future is, and I'm going to impose that future on you. Or there's a view of change and politics, which is kind of always negotiated, always respectful, always done, it's the notion of power, isn't it? You know, that the power over people, or the power to do things, you know, with people. And it's the power to do with people, you know, change with people. It's always the one that's going to be enduring and sustainable and transformative. I always loved the parable, the fable of the wind and the sun, and how they had that bet to get, you know, the traveller to take their coat off, and the wind goes first and blows and hails and rain and whatever to force the traveller to take their coat off, and of course they just wrap it up tighter, and then the sun comes out and shines and does it with the person, and the person takes off their coat because they're hotter, you know. And that's politics to me, because it's the right kind of change. You can't build a good society without being good. You can't build a good society without loving people. I mean, really sort of cosmically loving people and all that's great and beautiful around them. And that's why it's so cosmically sad that we have a political system that is so adversarial, that has a thing called the whip system. We actually have a thing. We have people whose job it is to whip other people into line. Like, in this day and age, it's just so archaic and speaks to such sort of, like, you know, historic barbarism, that's the way that, you know, our kind of politics operates. And I don't know about the catch-22 of kind of, you know, how do you get, you know, a better politics without a better society, and how do you get a better society without a better politics? That's the sort of conundrum we're in. But when you have political leaders like Caroline Lucas, you know, or I think Jane Dodds was supposed to be on this call, you know, I mean, Jane's in the Liberal Democrats, you know, Caroline's in the Green Party. I love both of those people. I love working with, I'm in the Labour Party. But it's such a joy to find what you have in common across politics, rather than what divides you and what the difference is, and why, you know, why you're right and they're wrong. And, you know, I am a member of the Labour Party, and I sort of hang on by my fingertips, in all honesty. And one of the reasons I hang on by my fingertips, you know, in all honesty, is because I hate there's a thing called Labourism, which is like, really like holds that party back, you know, of its singular and it's kind of like top down, and it's adversarial, you know, and it's kind of arrogant. Only Labour can whatever, you know, and it's not even true. What keeps me there is the brilliant, wonderful people in the Labour Party, who are always the people in communities that always do kind of the great things. So I'll shut up in a second, but it's that thing about be the change you want to see in the world. If you want to be a rebel, you know, then be kind. That believe the best in people. And if we do that and we demonstrate that, you know, at the end of the day, the only thing we can ever really change is ourselves and our own behaviour. And Compass has tried to do that. It's, you know, it's moved out of being just Labour to being, you know, welcoming Caroline Lucas and Jane Dodds and people from anywhere and everywhere. Do you believe in a set of values of much greater equality, sustainability and democracy? If we can change ourselves and open ourselves up, then all we can believe is that will impact on other people and get them to change and behave in a more plural, compassionate, kind, tolerant, you know, and transformative way. That's all we can do. So let's kind of commit ourselves to, you know, to doing that and following the brilliant example of compassion in politics, because I think what you're doing is, you know, absolutely key, because we're not going to do this by policy. We're not going to do it by just electing a different set of people. We're going to do it by changing the culture of our politics. And it's high time that we did that, because it's running so far behind, you know, how people lead their lives and what they want and what we need and the challenges that we face. We're going to have to do it in a different way. So let's get on quickly and do it and do it differently.
Thank you, Neil. We really, really do appreciate it and all your support. And obviously the same goes for Compass, and wonderful, inspiring and passionate talk there. So we have got some brilliant questions coming in, actually. I'm just going to try and summarize them or pitch them to people that I feel best. So Mira has asked, and I think this is probably aimed mainly at Jennifer, how do we actually bring about psychological change in politics to make, for example, lying bad rather than just sort of having to prevent it entirely? There's also been a question for Sunder. Have you seen change in cultural public opinion over the course of the COVID pandemic? And then there was another question which I saw from Deborah, I think it may be in the chat, which was about, is there a problem that people go into politics at the local level, they feel very inspired, and have high ideals, and then the system sort of sucks it out of them. So that might be, I think that's particularly one that's aimed at Neal, and then we have some really lovely comments about how great Neal was. So we're going to go with, if we go back with the order we had, so if we start with Sunder and the question directed at you, then Jennifer on psychology, and Neal on that question about what happens to people when they go into politics.
Yeah, thanks. The pandemic changed quite a few things. Often it reinforced and brought out things that were underlying. It shifted the salience of a lot of things. It sped up the sort of fading of Brexit, which hasn't gone entirely, but has become a more partisan thing, and it amplified things that were already there. What it did change is it gave people a reassuring and surprising sense of the amount of social connection there is in our society, especially at a local level, but not only at a local level, even while they have more mixed views about other things. And there's a hope that should be sustained and continue beyond, but there isn't an expectation that will happen. People do see it as more of a crossroads, that we could see the value of that, or we could just move back to where we are, or we could feel more separate. So in that sense, it is an opportunity that could be lost if it's not taken up, that there's a sense that we've learned some things we should do, but unless we organize, institutionalize that sense of connection, I think people will say, well, that was then, that was in the crisis, it didn't carry on beyond it.
So I think the question I was given was about how do we make lying bad. I think I agree with Neal that all of us are essentially good people, but that what happens is that we are encouraged through the culture and environment in which we live, and through the conflictual situation in which we find ourselves, of having to compete and to win and to get things across the line. And that encourages us to abandon those core beliefs that we all have. You know, no one sets out to be a liar, and yet if we care passionately about an issue, we can find ourselves justifying all sorts of mechanisms to try and win that ideological battle, or that policy battle. And it really comes back again to culture. You know, when we have a culture that rewards those who stand up for their truth, I'm thinking of Tracy Crouch right now, who resigned her position when the gambling law she'd been working on wasn't introduced. You know, that takes so much courage, and that is the sort of action we need to see rewarded. We need politicians to be able to change their mind, to not have them branded as making a U-turn, and that being almost a resignation issue if they initiate a policy that they then realise is mistaken and want to change the way they're doing things. But we have a political system that's so charged, we don't allow the better side of humanity to come into it. And I think that starts, as Neal said, with each one of us. And there is an absolutely lovely Rumi quote, which is, beyond talk of good and evil, or beyond talk of right and wrong, there is a field and I will meet you there. You know, so often we become so attached to our idea of what is right that we will do anything in the name of that rightness, and we lose ourselves and we lose the very goodness of the policies we're fighting for when we do that. We have to act with integrity, otherwise what we achieve as a result of our actions will lack integrity. So I think we need to detach from outer identities and keep coming back to that inner set of values that is stitched deep within each of us. We all feel uncomfortable when we lie. We all feel uncomfortable when we're unkind. So let's just stay connected with that part of us that knows.
That was lovely, Jennifer. Really nice and beautiful quote, which I'm going to try and remember and look up and pinch like a magpie, like I always do. But I think virtually everyone who comes into politics does it for good reasons. You know, wherever they are on the on the spectrum, and I noted that thing from Tracy Crouch as well, and just thought that was good. And I try and remember every time that I see Conservative politicians doing the right thing and saying the right thing, and and just logging that all the time, and reminding myself that, it's not a left-right thing. We're just all, people trying to do the right thing in the right way. I mean, I'm always haunted by that, Mrs. Thatcher, is it, Francis of Assisi, I think it is, earn as much as you can, save as much as you can, give as much as you can. That's not my definition of good politics, but I can understand goodness, in that. The whole Good Samaritan kind of thing that she kind of, worked by, you know, you have to earn the money to give the money away. Now, that's not my thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So let's kind of, you know, recognize that. And so whether it's Mrs. Thatcher coming into politics or, you know, someone further to the left, you can't not be much, not further to the left. I think they all come in with good intentions. And I think the system, you know, wears them down. I had once a senior Labour politician describe it to me as sort of like, you know, the bows of a ship sort of just become covered in carbuncles, you know, over time, and they just kind of get weighed down by the systems, and they forget why they were there, and they forget how to behave, and you get into this thing of the individual and the kind of means, you know, ends dislocation. It doesn't matter as long as I get there. If when I get there, it will be okay, because when I get there, I'm a good person and I'll pull the levers in the right kind of way. And it's that we have to get away from, really, that kind of mechanical, you know, heroic kind of CEO type of thing. When I'm in charge, it will all be okay and I'll dispense, you know, wisdom and goodness to the people, as opposed to how are you that kind of servant leader that creates the condition and the field and the ecosystem and the space in which people can make the good society themselves. And then it becomes much less about them and much more about the, you know, the culture and the connections. There's a publication on our website by a brilliant writer called Sue Goss, who both wrote a book for us once called The Open Tribe, to recognize that people came from places, but the tribes that were the one that thrived and survived were the ones that were open. But she wrote a thing recently called Garden Mind, which was the sort of mentality of how do you tend to society, and that much more kind of organic view of all of our interconnectedness and what kind of leadership you need to tender, you know, the garden of society, rather than the mechanic, you know, mind of control and top down, you know, and that kind of industrial metaphor. So I think, you know, lots of people do get disfigured by the horrible system. And that's why we need kind of brave and different leadership to do things, you know, in a different kind of way to change, you know, the system, to get, you know, encourage, you know, the right kind of people to enter it and behave in the right kind of much more beautiful way.
Thank you, Neil. We've just got time for a couple more questions, which I will put to everyone who wants to answer them. So there's one about the press. What can we do about the way that the media operates? And then there was another about the physical layout of Parliament. That might be, that was one specifically for Jennifer. What do we do about that? So Sunder and Neil, if you want to just talk about, if you want to focus on that, and then Jennifer, you've got a couple there to pick up. But back to you, Sunder.
I think you can focus too much on the media. I think the political media, social media dynamics all have an impact, but I think print media is, you know, having less impact than before. But it's this interaction, and we can do what we can about that. One point, disconnection more broadly, I think, in this conversation about whether it's a media culture, political culture, between reformers and the public, is the conversation can be more pessimistic and more catastrophizing where the public are. The public can think there are quite big strengths in our democracy around division and disagreements, good up to a point. You shut people in, you shut people out, they get things done. You know, we've got free speech. There's a robustness about it that's positive, but the culture goes too far. And sometimes when it can sound as if reformers sort of want everybody to agree on everything, or aren't aware of those strengths too. And I think the media point is one of those points. People do not trust the media. I think they would actually also have a lot of questions to ask if you were then making interventions about controlling it. I think the hate speech debate about social media is a much clearer one for people. The boundaries aren't there, and they should be.
I'm not really sure I've got a lot to add. I mean, I agree with Sunder. I always do. I've got anything else to add, really, Matt. They were great points. I'll hear from Jennifer.
Thanks, Neil. And if only politicians would say I haven't got anything more to add. With greatest respect, not to the politicians on this call. I really want to pick up the point about the media, because I'm a gamekeeper turned poacher, or vice versa. I used to be ITN's home editor, and I've also reported for the BBC. So I know what makes news, and what makes news is tension, is conflict. So I think the media does have a big responsibility in terms of how they define what's newsworthy, but it's a deeply symbiotic relationship. If we have a conflictual system of politics where we have a tug of war over rightness and truth, and we're making a mistake, catching someone else, gotcha type politics, then we're going to have a gotcha style of media. So it's a chicken and egg situation, but there are good journalists, just as there are good politicians who are trying to change the way in which this conversation happens, because when we have the incredibly charged journalistic environment that we have, you can't admit to not knowing a figure in the middle of an interview. You can't admit to having changed your mind. You can't even admit to agreeing with the other side, because where's the story? And so, yes, media, politicians, I see Arjun's there. He's one of the journalists that I'm thinking of when I talk about journalists who are trying to, Arjun's chairing the next debate, change the way in which we do journalism. Absolutely bears a responsibility, but so do we in the way we do politics.